We have three excellent speakers this morning. Each one's going to talk for about 15 minutes, and then we're going to end with a Q&A session. We did have a change of speakers a couple of weeks ago. Unfortunately, Dave McLean couldn't make it at the last minute, so we're thrilled that Rob Goldies from the Scott Fetzer Electrical Group was able to join us. If you have questions during the session, you can enter them in the GoToWebinar panel. The session will be taped, and we'll send you a link to it after the webinar is over. And now to the speakers. The first speaker is going to be George Lawrie. George is the Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research, serving application development and delivery professionals. He has more than 20 years' experience deploying global ERP applications in multinational companies. During his 5 years with Forrester, George has led research into topics such as ERP consolidation, IT investment prioritization, and big data best practices. Sandra Kurtzig is CEO and Chairman of Kenandy. She founded Kenandy in 2010 with a vision to once again transform the world of enterprise management software. She did this the first time in 1972 when she founded XaaS Computer Systems and created the Man family of products. During her 20-year tenure as founder, chairman, and CEO of XaaS, Sandra grew the company into one of the 10 largest software companies in the world. Rob Goldies is the general manager of the Scott Fetzer Electrical Group based outside of Nashville, Tennessee. Scott Fetzer Electrical Group is a Scott Fetzer company and a subsidiary of the Berkshire Hathaway Company. The company designs and manufactures electrical and mechanical power solutions for a diverse set of end markets and applications. And with that, I'll turn it over to George.
Thanks so much, Stuart. So in this 15-minute session, what I want to do is to identify for you what we've seen from the Forrester research. What are the factors that are really driving ERP software as a service adoption? I want to look at its impact on agility and innovation, and I want to connect that really to the rise of the networked economy. And in my final few minutes, I'm going to be bold enough to suggest to you an action plan. So let's move on and look at what's driving this ERP software as a service adoption. I would say that the further back we look, people talked a while ago about cost. People thought about cost. That's definitely not what's driving it now. What's driving it now is agility and speed. It's the ability to scale up and down. In an era of very cheap money, most large international firms have been growing by acquiring new business units. And those business units vary in size. They grow at different rates. They're in different locations. And what's really important for them is to be able to, first of all, implement in a very standard way, but also to be able to scale up and down. And if we go on to the next slide, we'll look a little bit more at some of the reasons that are driving this. So this impact on agility, and not just agility, but also innovation, is perhaps the most interesting factor. When we look at this slide, you can see that, yes, of course, you know, some of them, some 68% thought it might reduce their costs. But that was not really the most important factor. 75% are using software as a service to improve their agility. And here's an interesting thing. 72% are using speed of deployment itself as a benefit, the fact they can roll this out quickly and start in another location or a different business unit. And 71% say that software as a service is delivering new functions faster, so not waiting for release 99.9 of on-premise software, but being able to deliver this new functionality immediately. Let's go on to the next slide and look at the profound impact this can have on how firms operate internally. What I really want to draw your eye to here is, first of all, that software as a service applications and capabilities enable firms to innovate generally more quickly beyond IT. Why is that important? Is because most firms are really looking for a new way of relating to their customers. We think about this as being the age of the customer, and we see firms, all of them, having a kind of digital halo over what they do. It's not just physical stuff that they move. They're perhaps selling jet engines by the hour or tires by the mile. And having software as a service ERP gives them much more flexibility and agility around it. Secondly, software as a service applications enable changing the business processes to be on a given standard. And this is so important where you're growing a firm by making acquisitions. It enables you to get everybody playing from the same songbook. It enables you to cross-sell and upsell between business units, to have a common set of relationships with suppliers and customers. What else do we see? We see software as a service applications accelerated the adoption of mobile devices. Why is that? Because we don't have to plan anymore for the capacity that we have for an unknown number of calls perhaps to our application. We know as soon as you mobilize an application, people use it many more times they call on it. Well, when you move that to software as a service, that's all been virtualized in the cloud. You don't have to worry about it. What else? It improves collaboration with business partners who are using the same software as a service application. We'll look a bit further at this. It's what we call the network effect. Let's go on to the next slide and talk about, we've talked there a little bit about adopting software as a service, but why for ERP specifically? Well, first of all, for value. We talked a bit about this, the scalability across business units, the elasticity for growth and deployment in different locations and different speeds of growth. And all of you, if you're in perhaps a company that spans right across North America or maybe internationally, you'll know that different parts grow at different speeds. But here's the important thing also, transparency. Software as a service for ERP provides terrific transparency and continuous real-time visibility into what's happening in each of these business units. What terms are they granting? What suppliers are they working with? Are they using our global terms for that? What's their order to cash cycle time? What's their on-time order and accuracy of delivery? That enables you to monitor and manage and standardize these enormous groups that have grown over time much more easily. Let's move on to the next slide, which we're going to talk about the rise of the networked economy. Now, here's what's pretty interesting. The cloud service usage is growing and growing. This more recent research that we did just last year, towards the end of last year, it shows that firms are thinking, generally speaking, that their use of cloud will increase. And why are they thinking that? It's because it's enabling them to drive much more interconnection and much more transformation of their business and the network of their business. If we look on the next slide, we'll talk a bit about the idea of transformation opportunities. What does that really mean? It means perhaps if we're using the same application, we belong to the same community, same B2B community. It enables us to, first of all, have a real-time engagement with our employees. That's where the mobile devices are coming in, with our partners, perhaps our customers' employees, our suppliers, but also with our customers. And it enables us to start pioneering and evaluating these new business models and creating new sources of value. I talked about the idea of perhaps this digital halo around everything we do, around transferring assets into services. There's a whole transformation in the economy around moving from ownership to consumption, and people value being charged for that, and you can see it with all kinds of capital equipment that people typically now have a lot of digital halo around. So one example, firm that I worked with was a company making scanning devices for medical purposes. What did they really want to do? They wanted to understand what each of the business units were doing with those, to know where they were installed, how often they were used, and to know how they were calibrated. They could only do that by having all of them on a common application, which was in the cloud. What does it also do? It enables you to aggregate information for much smarter processes and for analytics about, for example, what the customers think of a particular model that you might have brought out. What's your level of collaboration with a supplier across your worldwide business network? What's their on-time delivery? Is it a problem with the supplier overall, or is it just in a particular location? Let's move on to the next slide. So we talked there a little bit about what's driving this adoption. We've talked about some interesting things around the network economy. What should you be doing? What should your action plan be now? Well, perhaps you ought to start thinking about measuring an opportunity cost in your current ERP. What is the shortfall in agility? Who is waiting for the ability to perhaps scale up or scale back their operations in one of your countries or one of your locations? What about the ease of use and the value? How well matched is the value to what people want to pay? Are they buying a server that they don't really need? Are they buying a ton of licenses that they don't need in advance and in anticipation? And how easy is it for them to mobilize these applications? And what about scalability? If you have perhaps mobile applications which are calling on that ERP, how can you be sure that you can really support that? And what about upgrades? How many people are waiting for new functionality in the next release? So let's move on to the next one. And if we continue this action plan, those are the simple things that you can do. What are the higher value things that you can do? Look for much more strategic value. What would it mean if you had a simple way for all your customers to be able to order once from you all the products in all the business units, perhaps to get a single invoice and a single set of terms? What would it mean for your CFO if they weren't able to get different terms in different business units and then perhaps extend their terms of credit? What about being able to manage your suppliers more closely and get perhaps economies of scale dealing with them? And what about new business models, new sources of value, being able to create a community amongst all of your customers so they can share ideas? And what about aggregating information to enable much smarter processes that you might have between you, perhaps for managing more effective trade promotions? If we go on to the next slide, you'll see all the reports that I drew this insight from. And on the next slide, you've got my contact details. If you want to contact me, I'd be very happy to share that information with you. So please feel free to give me a call or send me an email. And now what I'd like to do is introduce Sandra Kurtzig, who's CEO and Chairman of Kenandy, and she's going to speak next.
Well, thank you very much, George. It's a pleasure to do this webinar with George and with Rob. So thank you for joining us today. And we're just sort of amazed by how many people have signed up. We don't do very many of these webinars, but there are, I think, close to 150 people on the webinar today. So thank you all for coming and hearing what we have to say. I think George did such a fabulous summary of what he is seeing in the industry and why companies are gravitating to more digital enterprise. I'm going to talk a little bit about who Kenandy is for those who don't know. And really the evolution and implication for ERP today. And then specifically talks are about the order to cash, which is what we're seeing. Order to cash is the business. If you can't get an order in and you can't get paid, you really don't have a business, and everything obviously falls out when you think about an ERP out of that. So I was going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing, how companies are sort of moving to the next step and merging the future with the past being legacy and the future and current being more of the cloud-based systems. And then Rob is going to talk about, I'll talk a little about a couple case history studies, a small, a medium, and a large company, and then Rob is going to talk about specifically Scott Fetzer, which is a division of Berkshire Hathaway. So there he gets both the small and the medium and the large company. Kenandy is an ERP platform, and I hate to even use the word ERP because I think it's sort of such an old term, but for lack of changing the term, because it's obviously you can't change a term in an industry very easily, we're still using it. But I think ERP is morphing into how do you get a system that's more agile and can be implemented quickly and can respond to the business. And what Kenandy does is we basically do the order to cash, procure to pay, planning, production, global financials, and all or some of that depending on your company and how you want to strategically implement us. We're built on the Salesforce platform, so we inherit all the security and the flows of Salesforce. We don't have to put our own systems together because they are obviously putting systems all over the world right now. And our system allows you to interface with some of your old legacy systems, some of the newer systems, applets that might be on the Salesforce app exchange. So that next, please. I think this is an amazing statistic to me. It brings it all home. It actually ties into what George was saying as well. Is in the last 10 years, 70% of the Fortune 1000 companies have vanished. they just weren't able to adapt to change because things are happening so quickly, and not just in technology, but just in the way people are doing business. And by the year 2020, 50% of the workforce are going to be millennials. So your children or might be your bosses, and unless you're a millennial now, and then hopefully you'll still be around then. But the whole world is changing. The millennials expect to have systems that are as easy to use as what they just used on Amazon. I mean, even Amazon's getting a little dated. And they're also the Internet of Things. By 2020, there's going to be 70 billion Internet things that are going to be connected to the Internet. So the whole world is really getting closer and changing, and of course, globalization, where you can use a device, any device, anywhere in the world, whenever you want it, really changes the way people can think of their business model. Next, please. And if I look at, what was it like in the olden days? In the olden days, you built a piece of equipment, whatever your product was, your customer bought your product, you shipped the product, you got paid for it. That's totally changing. I think George hit on this point a bit, that with so much acquisition, companies are not just selling products. Please, next slide. Next. They're now selling, the product is becoming a service. So they're selling a product, they're selling software with the product, they're selling services, they're selling projects. If you're in medical systems, you're probably selling a whole series of medical devices because you most likely acquired a lot of companies, and you're selling these to hospitals. You're probably selling products from third-party vendors, and you're wrapping services around this. In fact, you're not just selling your product. You're in a lot of cases, you are renting your product. You're charging your customer by image, or you're charging them a rental. Everything is wrapped into a whole series of solution components, and in a lot of cases, especially with the very acquisitive larger companies, the customer has to go to different divisions of your company to buy products, to third parties. They have to sort of put this all together, or they have to, go to these different places. And as George said, you want to have consolidated billing. So go to the next slide. I think what the customers are looking for today is, in some ways, you might think of it as an architecture layer that's riding above your legacy systems, because the most important thing is to get the orders in and get the cash in at the other end, get the invoices out and get the cash in. So the idea of focusing on the most important application within the company, which does entail everything in a way, but it's to let the customer have one view, starting with an e-commerce application, to have one view to your company, to have all the products you're selling available and online so that the customer can see this information and track it, and to have a single coordinated order and fulfillment. So, and to keep, there's no real reason in some ways to replace all of your systems unless they're old. You can start with replacing this layer, which is order to cash layer, and then as you go forward, you can start replacing some of your old dated, systems underneath it. But this is sort of a consolidation layer. You might think of, you could go in, and it does all of the work of the order to cash. Why don't you go to the next layer, next slide? I think I did a summary slide here. Yeah, so if you think about just flipping upside down all of the things you think that goes into an ERP, and you look at it in terms of order to cash as your business. Under your customer order, you're going to have your credit, your configuration, your contract management, your trade promotion, your e-commerce, your pricing, your discounts. Some of that can be kept in your legacy system. Some of it is brought to the front end for your order processing. Then you have your order fulfillment, and you might do contract manufacturing. You might drop ship. You obviously have an available to promise issue. You want to see whether you can fulfill this customer order. You have your bill of materials, your procurement, and you can go as deep into your legacy environment as you want, or just pull the information up to your orchestration layer here. You ship your order, pick, pack, and ship. You have to have services scheduled, third-party fulfillments. You have tracking these orders, and then, of course, the most important part is to invoice quickly your customer with a very, very fast turnaround. And depending on the size of your company, some of our customers have the whole order-to-cash process automated from the EDI level all the way to the shipping level, and they just have one button. That's it. Everything gets processed. Well, they don't have a button because it comes in through EDI, and everything gets processed automatically. And obviously, in some of the smaller companies, they may have a more manual operation, but this is the kind of thing that we're seeing in the environment today. Let me talk a little bit about some of these customers. Do you want to go to the next slide? So the SaaS model, the software as a service, in some way democratizes the world because it allows small companies, medium-sized companies, and large companies to have the same services, to have this, be able to have the same software, and depending on, obviously, you know, how large or small they are and how complex they are, they will use more or less of the features, and in some cases, of course, be able to customize features if they want, because we're built in a managed package environment. You can write software around our particular objects. Big Heart Pet, one of our larger companies, has a very interesting history in that they started off being a $5 billion Del Monte Foods corporation. They had both consumer foods and pets products. They acquired a large pet product company in LA, NBI. That was up and running for a couple of years now. And then they spun off their consumer products, and we implemented their whole corporation, including their 5 manufacturing plants, warehouses, and co-packers, and they consolidated from 110, I believe, different legacy applications they had running. I mean, Del Monte is a 140-year-old company, and they consolidated down to 10 applications, Kenandy and a couple other Salesforce platform applications, and they developed some applications themselves internally. Their sales order process is totally automated from the time it comes in from EDI out to all the MRP functionality and shipped out. They have a very high sales order, supplier, work order volume. They have hundreds of thousands of EDI messages and millions of accounting entry lines. And so it's a very high volume, large corporation, total wall-to-wall Kenandy. And Dave McLean, the CIO, great guy, was supposed to be on the call today, but they just got acquired. Del Monte just got acquired by J.M. Smucker yesterday, so congratulations for the acquisition. We look forward to talking to Smucker now. And so there's a large company implementation. Moving on to a small company that has been a wonderful, fun company for us to work with. It's Merrill Sewing Machine Company, located in Massachusetts, and they run 98% of their business on Kenandy, and as the CEO, Charlie Miro, said, no sticky notes. You have 70% more productive today than they were, 2-3 years ago when they started this, when they first implemented Kenandy. They're over 100-year-old company that's the largest and I think one of the only industrial sewing machine companies in the world. They sell around the world. And they have been able to, without programmers, add features and functions and to the system very quickly. They configure as their own processes like repairs without any IT staff. Now, moving on to the next slide, of course we have Rob Goldiz, who's going to talk to us about Scott Fetzer. Scott Fetzer is a subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway, so you have here the big, small, and in between. And I think I won't steal any of Rob's thunder here and let him talk about Scott Fetzer and what they've done in the last couple months. And welcome Rob, to tell you a little bit about Scott Fetzer and their implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. So good morning, everyone. This is Rob Goldiz. I'm the general manager at SFEG, as we like to call ourselves. We're part of Scott Fetzer, which is part of Berkshire Hathaway. What I want to talk about today is a little bit who we are, just so you have some background in the context of what we were trying to accomplish by moving to the cloud and moving to Kenandy, why we chose to change horses in terms of ERP providers, and why that entailed moving to the cloud, our experience in that transition, and then our plans, some things we've already done and some things we continue to work on and plan to do to exploit the technology that we have available with Kenandy and Salesforce and some other things that we're doing. And so who we are, we're a manufacturer of power-related products. What does that mean? We make and sell right here in Middle Tennessee, outside of Nashville. We make transformers, motors, motion control products, So our products, the things that we produce, go into very large-scale HP printers, 3D systems, 3D printers, go into GE and Whirlpool appliances. We have transformers that light up old-school neon signs for P.F. Chang's, Wells Fargo, Enterprise Rental Car, and various companies like that. We're no different than many other manufacturing companies. We had legacy systems, outdated business processes, competition from China, competition from Mexico, so a lot of foreign competition, but had great products and a great history and great legacy. And prior to 2010, we operated as, SFEG operated as 3 separate business units under Scott Fetzer, and in 2010, there was an effort to consolidate those 3 different unique brands into what is now SFEG. Next slide. So this is, in some way real, but some way not real, right? So the system that we were on previously was literally written in the 80s. Obviously, there have been updates to it. I like to call it the green screen. It was written around the time that these IBM PCs were out, and people used terminal emulators, and so the people that had been here a long time knew how to do it. They knew that if you hit F5, tab, menu 6, that you could get into XYZ information about a customer or a sales order. But the problem is, as companies hire and staff turns over, is you get people that are coming to work with iPhones, right? They expect to be able to point, click, touch, not need to read a user manual, not need to go ask for help. That they expect technology to just work and it just to make sense. And so employees' expectations have changed. One of the other observations that I made when I joined the organization was that our system of record, our business system, was it was a system of record, but a lot of activity was happening outside of it. And so approvals happened outside of the system. Sales orders, purchase orders, everything was being filed with paper. A lot of offline analysis happening in Excel or other means. And so as soon as things happen offline, they're out of date. They're potentially out of sync. You're communicating via emails to reference purchase orders that people then have to take the email to go to the purchase order to see what somebody's talking about. And so a lot of activity happening outside of the system. The other piece, before we get to the next slide, is, in terms of why cloud. So we were running our old business system on an AS400 in our server room. We had to deal with backups. We had to deal with disaster recovery plans. We had to deal with one person that was essentially the expert in that system. And so anytime I wanted a report, I wanted data, I wanted information, or virtually anyone else on the executive team, you have to go to the gatekeeper, so to speak, who knows how to write the report to pull the data from the database and give you an Excel spreadsheet. And then when it's not quite what you want, you go back to them. And so you iterate through this process, and you have a bottleneck with one person. And so we wanted to find a new solution that was collaborative, that was mobile, that was we didn't have to worry about hardware, that it was easy enough to use, that people can write their own reports, people can write their own dashboards, and things like mobility were out of the box. So if we move forward to the next slide, some of our checklists in terms of why the cloud and why switch systems, right? We wanted real-time reporting and dashboards that users can use, that users can write. So we didn't have to go to a gatekeeper. And when I say real-time, real-time, we're not relying on batch jobs to run in the background or overnight to know, if we want to look at an income statement today for how the month is performing, we can pull up an income statement today to look at how the month, how we're doing. Electronic workflows and approvals, all the things that were happening offline, how do we get them into the system? How do we put workflows and approvals around purchase orders that follow our business rules, so that if I want to see why do we have XYZ material on our shop floor, I can go trace that back and see who bought it, how it was approved, when it was approved. Collaboration was very important. Instead of having all this activity happening offline on email in conversations, we wanted a way to collaborate around objects, I'll say, that a Salesforce term. And so if there's discussion around a purchase order, have that happen on the purchase order. If there's a discussion about a sales order, or can we accelerate a schedule for a customer, have that happen on the sales order. So there's no referring back and forth between an email and a sales order, or an email and a purchase order, or an email and a work order. Another thing that was very important was enforcement of business logic and business rules. In terms of, as they talked about earlier, having the ability to write and implement business rules that make sense, that are enforced, and that there's transparency to. And so there's a lot of capabilities in Salesforce and in Kenandy where you can turn on history tracking very simply. You can put in place business rules so that you can see how the business is performing, why things are happening, and have full traceability into how you got to the current state. We wanted the ability to automate repetitive tasks and mundane tasks. Every business has this, but the more you can simplify things, whether it's putting a lot of steps behind a single button click or doing things as far as Big Heart Pets did, we wanted the ability, whether it was at go live or later, to put in place automation around repetitive office tasks. No hardware, I mentioned this earlier, right? We don't need to be buying and maintaining hardware and paying service contracts to IBM for AS400s. That's not our expertise. Even since I've been here, we've had power outages and things like that related to things going on in the city. And when that happens, the whole business is essentially shut down. And so not having hardware and being able to rely on somebody like Salesforce to host all that is a huge burden relief. And then finally, mobile. I mean, employees expect it. Everybody comes to work with iPhones or Android phones, and they expect things to be mobile. Next slide. So these are my kind of different smiley faces and reactions as we were moving to Kenandy. So our implementation for us was a 4-month process. It was what the folks at Kenandy scoped out initially. We kept to that schedule, and we went live in 4 months. And so I'll say, I've got the smiley face with the cool shades on. Everything went well during implementation. We worked with Kenandy to figure out what it was important and what was critical for go live versus what were things that we would do later as the business continued to evolve. And then, you get to that point, if any of you have switched business systems, that as soon as you make the cutover, we did a cold cutover, right? We had our date, November 1st is when we were going to switch over. And November 1st, the old system was essentially shut down to only administrative access, and the new system, Kenandy, went live. And there was a lot of nervousness and panic, like any system, right? As I like to say, the coffee cup moved from the right side of the desk to the left side of the desk, and people now had to use their mouse instead of knowing these shortcuts. And we did a lot of training and stuff, but there was a lot of issues around that we had to deal with around data migration, how data, came out of the old system and whether it was correct there. And so there was a lot of internal angst, I'll say, amongst the employees as we made the switch over. But every day, every week, things settled out and issues got cleaned up and data integrity got cleaned up. And then we went through a period, I'd say around the end of the year, where things were calm and people were getting the hang of it. And then since then, really since the beginning of the year, is when we've started to, say, exploit the capabilities. And so as users, with the proper access, obviously, we now can rapidly test new business logic and roll out shortcuts and automations very quickly. And so we will, for example, right, since going live on Kenandy, we've automated approvals around journal entries. Previously, those were done offline. We've automated document generation around purchase orders and sales orders. So now employees no longer have to click certain buttons at the end of those steps. And so once a purchase order gets approved, for example, the document is already generated waiting for them. The next step is to go ahead and automatically send that out to the supply base. Those are little things that can be done on Kenandy on the Salesforce platform by us, right? We can go consult with Kenandy as we have questions about how things work, but you don't need to be experts. If you can use a mouse and if you've used other systems before, these are things that you can do as users, obviously with the appropriate access rights. And so we've done a lot since the beginning of the year around implementing new business rules around how stock flows through the factory, to little automation tips and tricks and things like that, like to track a package that we ship out to a customer. Instead of having to take a tracking number and go to FedEx to track it, right, we put in some business logic that knows if it's a FedEx shipment with a FedEx tracking number, this button is going to just go ahead and track that for you. Next slide. And so our plans going forward, right? The first kind of third of that slide is we continue to try to build out additional automation capabilities and tools for mobility around Kenandy and Salesforce. And that literally is a screenshot I took of the Salesforce application with Kenandy inside of it from my phone. We're doing a lot here at SFEG around shop floor automation, and have implemented and continue to buy and implement automation to enhance our productivity, improve our competitiveness, and give more tools to our shop floor employees. And so one of the things that we're doing around that automation is building some technology in-house to talk to our robots and collect data from our robots to eventually report production, have robots report production to Kenandy. And so as a robot finishes making a part, that it will essentially signal to Kenandy that it produced. Again, to tie the shop floor and what's happening on the shop floor to the system. And all of that becomes far easier when you're using cloud applications that have standardized APIs where you can tweak and customize workflows, approvals, triggers, all those types of things. And then the third side, the third piece of it is new product development and exploiting the connected world. So as I like to tell my employees here, we make dumb products today. Right? When we ship our product out, it is no longer talking to us, providing any feedback to us about how it's being used, the ability to do firmware updates, all that doesn't exist today. And so there's a big push internally here to make our products smarter so that when we ship out a brushless DC motor, let's say, to HP, and HP puts these in these very large printers that go around the world, that they can report back to us how they're being used. And so what we're going after is making not just our products smarter, but tying that back to the data that's in Kenandy and Salesforce so that we can start to take advantage of the connected world and know how our customers' products are performing. And with that, I think that's the end of my part, and I'll turn this back over to Stuart for questions.